All right, thank you, Crystal. Okay, so like Crystal said, today's session is a guide to the 2026-2027 alternative application. I am your presenter for today, Nicole, a training and development specialist for the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. If you have joined the other sessions today, you may be familiar with this already. If not, welcome. A little bit of background information about ISAC. We are the financial aid agency for the state of Illinois. So our mission is to provide Illinois students with information and assistance to help make education beyond high school accessible and affordable. So we do this by administering different scholarships and grants to students across the state of Illinois, particularly the MAP grant, which we will be discussing quite a bit today. But then here on the PD team, we also provide professional development offerings on things like navigating the financial aid process, resources and support for underrepresented students, and understanding student loan repayment and forgiveness programs. So here's what our agenda looks like for today. We will start out with an overview of the Retention of Illinois Students and Equity Act overview, also commonly referred to as the RISE Act. We will get into the eligibility criteria for the RISE Act, and then we will, of course, be talking about the alternative application for Illinois state financial aid. We'll take a look at getting started and answering those pre-screening questions for the alternative application, and then we will do a walkthrough of the application. So like I said, starting out with an overview of the RISE Act. Just a little bit of background about the RISE Act. The RISE Act was signed into law on June 21st of 2019. And the RISE Act did two different things. So first, it lifted the 75 MAP paid credit hour cap, or the MPCH cap, for students who had not yet reached junior level in their degree program. So if, for example, a student had, let's say they switched their major or they had to repeat a class, this benefited all Illinois students in those situations. But more importantly, for our purposes here today, it also provided a pathway for eligible undocumented students who are disqualified from receiving federal student aid to apply for state-funded financial aid programs in Illinois. And then more recently, we saw the passing of Public Act 1040164, and this expanded the RISE Act. So it expands eligibility for financial aid to qualifying students. It expands these students who are considered eligible for the RISE Act. And qualifying students may apply for all state, local government, or public university financial aid programs. So yes, that includes the MAP grant, but it also includes, for example, local scholarships or institutional scholarships, tuition waivers, room and board assistance, and so on. So the MAP grant, but also more than that. And then to give you a brief summary of the RISE Act, it provides for an alternative MAP application process for students who are unable to apply for federal student aid programs. So we will be talking about this later in the presentation about who is considered an eligible non-citizen and who is not considered an eligible non-citizen. But students who are either not U.S. citizens or not eligible non-citizens are unable to apply for those FSA programs such as the Pell Grant. So the RISE Act provides an alternative. It also relies on criteria that is already enshrined in state law that is already used to determine eligibility for who is considered an in-state student to receive in-state tuition at public institutions. It does impact all Illinois colleges, both public and private, as well as both 2- and 4-year institutions. And as I mentioned earlier, it applies to all state, local government, or public university financial aid programs. And then it also provides access to those other state-funded financial aid programs, including scholarships. So like I said, this goes beyond just the MAP grant. Now, of course, there is still certain eligibility criteria to be MAP eligible, or RISE Act eligible, I should say. So now we're going to get into the eligibility criteria for the RISE Act. So this is established in Public Act 1030876. This established the in-state tuition eligibility criteria. So this will be taking effect July 1st of 2026. And this expands and extends rules for when students are considered Illinois residents for in-state tuition purposes, if they meet all of the requirements of either pathway. So there are two pathways. We will look at each in more detail. The first is the high school route, and then the second is a completely new pathway, which is the high school and community college route. So the high school route was already in place. This is just an expansion of what already existed. And then the high school and community college route is an additional pathway. So starting off with pathway 1, the high school route, some of this may seem pretty familiar to some of you already. So the first element of the eligibility criteria is that the student has to have resided with their parent or guardian while attending an Illinois public or private high school. They also have to have graduated from a public or private high school or have received the equivalent of a high school diploma, such as a GED in Illinois. They have to have attended a public or private high school in the state of Illinois for at least 2 years before enrolling at the university. So that is really the main update to Pathway 1, is that this is now 2 years, which is really great because I know I saw this as a core member. You would get students who came in halfway between their sophomore and junior year, and so they didn't quite meet that full 3-year criteria. So this is just expanded. So now it's only 2 years of residency that they have to have. Then moving on to number 4, they cannot have established a residence outside of the state of Illinois. And then just like before, they have to provide the institution with an affidavit stating that they, the individual, will file an application to become a permanent resident of the United States at the earliest opportunity that they are eligible to do so. So this is still a good faith affidavit. They're not going to follow up with the student to check in on their progress, primarily because the earliest opportunity is going to look different for every student. So that is staying the same. And then moving on now to pathway 2, like I said, this is a new pathway, and this is the high school and community college route. So the eligibility criteria for this pathway is that the student has to have attended an Illinois high school and or community college for at least 3 years total, with at least 2 years in one institution. So for example, if you have a student who has gone to high school in Illinois for 1 year, so they would not meet the criteria for pathway 1, but then let's say that they go to community college in Illinois for 2 years to get their associate's degree. If they want to go on and get their bachelor's degree in Illinois, then they could use pathway 2 to apply for the MAP grant to be able to pay for that education. So moving on to the second element, they have to have graduated from an Illinois high school or have received an equivalent of a high school diploma and earned an associate's degree or at least 60 transferable credit hours from an Illinois community college. So an associate's degree or the equivalent of 2 years of credit hours from an Illinois community college. They do have to have resided in Illinois during that time of schooling. And then like we saw in pathway 1, they have to have not established residency outside of the state of Illinois. And similarly to pathway 1, or I shouldn't even say similarly, it's the same. They agree to swear and affirm to the university that they will file an application to become a permanent resident of the United States at the earliest opportunity that they are eligible to do so. And of course, they are not currently a citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States. So now let's take a look at the MAP eligibility. The application to apply to be considered for the MAP grant is either the FAFSA or the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. As I mentioned, undocumented students are not eligible to receive the Pell Grant, so they technically could fill out a FAFSA, but it would not benefit them to do so. Other criteria for the MAP grant are to meet that Illinois residency requirement. You also have to demonstrate financial need. You have to be enrolled for a minimum of 3 credit hours per term in a degree or certificate program. You also have to meet satisfactory academic progress, or SAP, as defined by that institution. You do have to be enrolled in an Illinois MAP approved school, which does include private institutions. And you also have to be at an undergraduate status. So you cannot continue to use the MAP grant beyond an undergraduate degree. Taking a look at that MAP residency piece, for a dependent student, this would be looking at the parents who are required to report their information on the alternative application. So the parents have to physically reside in Illinois for dependent students, meaning that Illinois must be the parent's fixed and permanent home. So I know that there has been in the past some confusion about the language of, legal residence. So this is just meaning that Illinois is the parent's fixed and permanent home. For independent students, the student has to reside in Illinois at the time of the application, and they also have to have resided in Illinois for 12 continuous months prior to the start of the academic year for which aid is requested. And now let's take a look at the process of submitting an alternative application. The first step is going to be to complete the pre-screening questions. So these are right at the beginning of the application to help applicants determine if they are eligible to complete either the FAFSA or the alternative application. There is a lot of misinformation out there, and so sometimes you may have a student who thinks that because their parents are undocumented, even though they themselves are citizens, that precludes them from filing a FAFSA, and so they may mistakenly go to submit an alternative application instead. So the pre-screening questions are built in to avoid mistakes like that. We will take a look at those pre-screening questions in more detail later on. The next step is to create the student profile, and then an ISAC ID number will be assigned to the student. The next step is to provide, of course, student and parent data if the student is a dependent student. There are 7 sections of the application. Each one will collect different pieces of demographic and financial information about the applicant, as well as their parents, again, if applicable, if they are a dependent student. And then the final step will be to review the application and then sign and submit. So students and parents will sign that application electronically using a PIN number that will be generated and sent to them in an email by ISAC. So now let's get into the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. As far as the information that is needed to submit a 2026 to 2027 alternative application, first and foremost, you have to set up that student profile for the alternative application. Second, students and parents for dependent students will need to have an email address, and both parents and students each have to have their own email address. That is how that PIN number is going to be sent to them, and they do have to have their own email address. They'll also need to have records of income available. So this is from the prior year, so the 2024 federal income tax return or 1040 form, W-2s, any other records of income earned from work, business, child support received, as well as any other untaxed income. And then any information about investments. So this would be savings, certificates of deposit, stock options, bonds, 529 plans, as well as other college savings programs, investment real estate, businesses, and farms. Unfortunately, the alternative application does not have the direct data exchange tool like the FAFSA does, which I'm a huge fan of that tool. I think it makes life a lot easier for students and parents and everyone involved, but unfortunately, We do not have that capability in the alternative application, so they will need to be entering this information manually. And then finally, there is that PIN number that's going to be generated and sent to the student and to the parent for dependent students in an email, and they're going to need that PIN number to sign the application electronically. It's similar to how for the FAFSA, a student and parent would use their studentaid.gov account. Instead, it is a PIN number. So now we're going to take a look at the different sections of the alternative application. Section 1 is student demographics. Section 2 is student financials. Section 3 determines dependency status. So if it is determined that a student is a dependent student, that would take them to Section 4, which is parent demographic, financial, and household information. If it is determined that the student is an independent student, then they'll go to Section 5, which is they will be answering questions about their household size for them, the student. Then Section 6 will be school selection, where they put the schools that they want their information to be sent to. One thing that is different is that on the alternative application, a student can only put 10 schools as opposed to the FAFSA's 20. And then finally, Section 7, which is where the student signs and submits the form. A couple unique features of the alternative application. So like the FAFSA, it does generate a student aid index, which is used to determine the student's MAP eligibility. However, the student will not see it in the same way that they will on the FAFSA. So if a student wants to know their own student aid index, they'll need to go to the financial aid office of that institution that they're planning to attend. Students can also still save their data and return later to sign their application, so they do not need to do it all in one sitting. Some questions will be pre-populated based on the student's previous answers. And then students also have the option to access more information about a question through that little question mark feature, where they can click on that to provide more context to a question if they are confused about it. They can also still go back and make corrections to their completed alternative application. And they can troubleshoot their username and password using challenge questions that they will create. So now let's take a look at getting started and those pre-screening questions. So when a student wants to get started with the application, they are going to navigate to the featured section of the ISAC website, which is linked at the bottom of the slide, which will be available to you later. It's just www.isac.org/alternative application. And there they will select the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. So the student can find the application under the application process for MAP, which is screenshotted and up on the slide so you can see what that looks like. It just kind of tells them the steps of the application process and how MAP eligibility is determined. It lets them know a little bit about those pre-screening questions, which we will go over in more detail, as well as if an applicant answers the pre-screening questions in a way that indicates that they should not complete the alternative application, they will see messaging to consult a high school counselor, financial aid professional, or ISAC core member. And then a little bit more about the student aid index, which I already covered. So then over on the right, you can see it has a picture to kind of draw your eye towards it. And then this is where students can access the application. And then that brings us to the alternative application homepage. You can find various different resources here. There is a user guide to help provide more information about the application, as well as some resources. And then there are different ways to get into the application. So first, you can select the academic year that you are applying for. I would advise you to take some caution here and make sure that students don't select the wrong year, since they will be applying for the following year in the same way that they do if they're completing a FAFSA. So it would be the 2026 to 2027 application. And then, like I said, there are 3 different ways that they can get into the application from this page. If they are a first-time applicant, they should go to Start under where it says First-Time Applicants. This is where they're going to start their application. For returning applicants, they should go to that second option where it says returning applicants, and this is where they will be asked to log in. And this is where they can either complete a saved in progress alternative application or make corrections to their application. And then for parents to get in and submit their parent signature, they would just go to that last tab, which is parent signature, and they can use that button to sign their student's application. So then we are going to be going through this as if we are a first-time applicant. So the student will see this welcome message where they will be presented with information on what the MAP grant is, as well as whether they should complete the alternative application or the FAFSA, and then a little bit of information about confidentiality and privacy, which we will touch on in more detail in just a minute. So now taking a look at these pre-screening questions, the very first step is to determine citizenship status. So a student should file a FAFSA, of course, if they are a US citizen, but also if they are an eligible non-citizen. So for the FAFSA, people who are considered eligible non-citizens are holders of a US permanent resident card, holders of a conditional green card, a holder of an arrival departure record or an I-94 form from the Department of Homeland Security showing any of these following designations. So the designation of refugee, asylum granted, parolee, as long as they are paroled for a minimum of 1 year and that is not expired, or a Cuban Haitian entrant. So one thing that I do want to point out about these different statuses is that they have to have been granted. So you may encounter students who are seeking refugee status or who are seeking asylum, and they are not considered eligible non-citizens until that has been granted. So in the meantime, they would still be considered non-eligible non-citizens. Other eligible non-citizens include T visa holders, so T1, T2, T3, and so on, or someone who has documentation from the Department of Homeland Security showing that they meet the definition of battered immigrant qualified alien. So if a student meets any of these different statuses, then they should actually be directed to complete the FAFSA instead. Then there are some other common statuses that you may encounter in your work. Some common ones include I-94 forms that are stamped with another endorsement not found in the eligible non-citizen section, so commonly temporary protected status or TPS, which we did not cover on the previous slide, J1 or J2 visas, F1 or F2 visas, people who have DACA. So DACA is actually not a citizenship status. So that while it's listed as a status, this is just something that you may encounter that would not qualify an individual as an eligible non-citizen, or U visa holders. So while these students may not be eligible for federal student aid, they may still be eligible to complete the alternative application if they meet the criteria of the RISE Act that we covered previously. And now continuing on with more pre-screening questions, these have to do with eligibility criteria. So the student will answer the citizenship question, as well as they have to meet all 5 of those requirements to be considered an Illinois resident. So these are the same requirements that we went over earlier in the presentation, and then it will tell them either that they are not eligible to complete an alternative application or that they are eligible to start their application. So if they are, they will see that based on the responses you provided, you are eligible to file an alternative application for Illinois financial aid. Click on the Start Application button below to begin your application. They would click on Start Application and proceed from there. Whereas otherwise, if they do indicate that they are not eligible to file an alternative application, it does link them to the FAFSA website. So if they are not eligible to fill out the alternative application based on, for example, residency, they haven't lived in the state long enough, they still technically can complete a FAFSA. They will not be eligible for federal student aid, but it may be recommended either for graduation purposes, maybe it's required by the school they're going to have a financial aid application on file, whatever the case may be, so then they can still go and fill out the FAFSA. And then more pre-screening questions, these have to do with FAFSA completion. So it asks if the student has filed a FAFSA. Like I said, there is a lot of misinformation floating around out there. A student may have thought they had to do both. They may have filled out the FAFSA, found out that they're not an eligible non-citizen, so now they're coming to the ALT app. It could be a lot of different things. So it just lets them know if they do indicate that they did already file a FAFSA and they are still eligible to file an alternative application, that they just need to follow up with their financial aid office and let them know, I accidentally filed a FAFSA, the alternative application is the correct application. So that is where they just need to take that extra step to reach out to the financial aid office to ensure that the correct application is processed. So either way, whether they indicate yes or no, they can still go ahead and start the application. They just may see messaging about that extra step. And then, of course, I do want to take a moment to touch on this very important notice, which has to do with privacy and data sharing in the alternative application. So understandably, you may encounter some students who have concerns or some hesitancies about completing an alternative application. So they will see this messaging about their personal information, letting them know that ISAC does collect their information on the ALT app and shares it with the colleges that they list on the form. This is information that can be used to personally identify them. So that includes their name, address, email address, and personal financial information, as well as for dependent students, information about their parents, or if they are married, information about their spouse. That will be shared with the colleges as well. And ISAC is required to keep that information for at least 7 years. It does let them know that we at ISAC take data security very seriously. So we collect, store, and share that data in a secure manner. However, it is important to understand that even though there are currently laws in place in Illinois to protect student privacy, new and changing federal policies may impact the privacy of their data. So it is very important for students and families to understand the risks of sharing your personal information on this application. So while we definitely don't want to scare anybody away from the alternative application, we of course want students to receive the aid that they're eligible for. We also want to help students make an informed decision. Particularly in this current climate, there may be some heightened fears. So we just want students to feel that they are able to make an informed decision. A couple of things that you can say to give them peace of mind is that things with financial aid and the financial aid world tend to move very, very slowly, as well as if they or their families filed taxes 2 years ago, that information is already out there. So those are just some things that you can say to guide your conversation. The student then has the option to either proceed with completing the application, or if they decide that they are not comfortable with completing the application, they can choose not to. So either way, the choice is up to the student. If the student does decide that they would rather not proceed with completing the alternative application, then they can be pointed in the direction of applying to institutional scholarships instead. So now we're going to start off with a walkthrough of the application. Starting off with that student profile. So all fields are required. A student also can't use the same email address for the ISAC student portal profile. So they may have to use a different email address. And then that ISAC ID number will be assigned after the student profile has been created. This will be a unique ID number for that student, and it will remain the same for subsequent years. So if a student is going to continue to apply for aid for their following years of school, they will need to use that same ISAC ID number. Then we're going to see this introduction page. There are some questions or guidelines here for commonly asked questions. So the documents that are needed to complete the application, how a student can get help completing the application, can I save the alternative application if I can't finish it, which we already mentioned, the answer is yes, how signing the alternative application works, and then how to make corrections. So then they can continue to the application. Bringing us to the first section, which is student demographics. So the ALT app is modeled after the FAFSA. So as we go through this, you may think it looks pretty familiar if you are familiar with the FAFSA, and that's why. So first, the student's first and last names, along with their email address, will be auto-populated based on what they put in their student profile information. And then that PIN number that is sent to them will be sent to the email address that is listed in this student demographic section. Continuing on with these student demographics, here they are going to indicate their marital status. Continuing on, still in the student demographics section, it will ask about students' college grade level. Just like you would with the FAFSA, this seems to be something that students get kind of confused about. So make sure that they know that they are going to be a first-year student when they start college the following year. Then there's a question about whether they will be pursuing a teacher certification as well as parents' education status. This is just for demographic purposes. It does not affect their eligibility for the MAP grant, but it just lets us know if they are first-gen student as well as the student's high school completion status. And then I also want to provide this update on assets and investments. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act updates the Student Aid Index asset calculation to exclude the following from the current net worth of businesses and farms. So they should not be reported as assets on the FAFSA or the alternative application. If they have a family-owned business with 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees, if it is a farm on which the family resides, or if it is a commercial fishing business, as well as those related expenses owned and controlled by the family. So in any of those cases, they would not report the net worth of that business or farm. Moving on to section 2 now. So this is the student financial section. It's still going to use prior tax information. So in this year, it would be 2024. They're going to use 2024 tax information. Like I said, unfortunately, we don't have the super useful direct data exchange tool here. So this will have to be input manually. They're going to put their tax return filing status, so whether they filed jointly or separately, the type of tax return that was filed, income earned from work, the student's adjusted gross income, as well as their spouses if they have a spouse, also income tax paid, again, both student and spouse if applicable, education credits, and then a Schedule A, B, D, E, F, or H filing status. Now, if a student does have a question about any of those things, remember that they can click on that question mark to see information about each question. And then continuing on with section 2, they also need to report their financials. So this would be their total in their cash, savings, and checking accounts, which nowadays with online banking, it's pretty easy to just pull it up on your phone and see what you've got in your bank account, as well as a net worth of investments, including real estate, but not including the home in which the student lives, as well as the net worth of a student's business and or investment farms, if applicable. Now moving on, still in section 2, but additional financial information. So if they receive child support, for the student. So if the student's parent is receiving child support, then that will be reported in the parent section. So we are still in section 2, student financials. Section 3 is dependency status. So this determines whether the student has to provide parent information. The dependency status questions look the same. So they ask about whether the student is serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, if they are a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, if they have children or other dependents, if they are an orphan, a ward of the court, or are in foster care, or have been at any point since they turned 13, or if they are an emancipated minor. They also ask if the student is in a legal guardianship with court documentation, or if they were at the time that they turned 18. Then there's also the same question you would see on the FAFSA about whether they may be an unaccompanied homeless youth and whether they have that determination. So that can be from the director or designee of an emergency or transitional shelter, street outreach program, homeless youth drop-in center, or other program serving those experiencing homelessness. If you went to, it was one of the 10 a.m. sessions, they talked about how that last piece is left intentionally vague so that it can be broadly applied. Next would be the homeless district liaison, or a director or designee of a project supported by a TRIO or GEAR Up program, or a financial aid administrator. And then finally, it asks if any unusual circumstances prevent a student from providing parent information. So the exact language is if unusual circumstances prevent the student from contacting their parents, or contacting their parents would pose a risk to the student. I keep skipping my slides. So then, still in the dependency question, if a student is determined to be dependent, they will hopefully select that they will provide information about their parents. If not, they will say that they are unable to provide information about their parents, but there are certain circumstances that are not considered unusual. So if they don't live with their parents don't provide them with financial support, their parents simply refuse to contribute to their college expenses, their parents do not claim you as a dependent on their income tax return, or their parents do not want to provide their information on the alternative application, those do not qualify as unusual circumstances. So if that's the case, the student would have to select, I am unable to provide information about my parents. So dependent students, as I've said before, they are required to provide parental information. If their status is determined to be dependent, they have to report the income and investments of both themselves and their parents. If they are independent, they will have to report income investments of themselves and then their spouse if they are married. And then some additional information may be required. So as we're all familiar with how that process can go, when following up with a financial aid office, they may ask for some documentation, they may ask for letters of support, whatever the case could be to determine their status. Now, if they are unable to provide parent information, dependent students may still be eligible to complete the alternative application even without parent information if they have an unusual circumstance. So if contacting the parents would pose a risk to the student, or if they have no way of contacting the parents. So if parents have abandoned the student, if they are estranged, if parents are incarcerated, these could all be unusual circumstances. However, and I did mention these earlier, there are some common reasons that you may encounter that are not considered acceptable reasons for providing parental information. So if the parent just doesn't want to put their information on the application, they simply don't want to help pay for college, which in that case, hopefully you could explain to them that just providing their information on the application does not put them on the hook to pay for college. So that could be something to clarify. Parents not claiming the student on their taxes, usually that is just a misconception because of the dependency language that is used, or if the student doesn't live with their parents just because they're of age and they want some more independence, maybe they're 19, 20 and they want to go get an apartment. The difference would be if they are fleeing an abusive situation and that's why they don't live with their parents. So there may be a little bit of digging around that you have to do to understand whether that would be an unusual circumstance or not. So who's a parent for the purposes of the alternative application? That would be biological or adoptive parents or step parents while married to the biological or adoptive parent. Parents who are living together must both provide information on the ALT app regardless of their marital status. And then for divorced parents, the student would just report the parent who provided the most financial support within the last 12 months. If that financial support is equally split, then the student would just report the parent with greater income and assets. That brings us to section 4, which is parent demographics. This is going to collect the same data elements that the FAFSA does, so parent's name, date of birth, address, marital status, and state of residence. Again, that just talks about residency being established in that state, not immigration status. And it does not collect a social security number or an ITIN. For parent household, it'll ask about family size, the number of students who are in college, as well as if anyone in the family is eligible to receive those federal benefit programs, such as earned income credit, federal housing assistance, free or reduced lunch, Medicaid, SNAP, WIC, and so on. For both Section 4 and Section 5, Section 4 also collects the tax and current financial information from the parents, and then it may request parent, spouse, or partner data, just depending, again, on marital and tax filing status. So if they file jointly. It will not require 2 parent signatures, but an email will be required for at least one parent. Section 5, again, that's for independent students, their household information. So it would be their household size, the number of children or dependents that they have, the number in college, as well as if anyone in that household is eligible to receive federal means tested benefit programs. That brings us to Section 6, which is school selection, where here students can select up to 10 Illinois MAP approved schools, and students can go back and change their school choices. And then finally, that brings us to Section 7, which is just to review. So the student should review their application and make any edits as needed. It's a lot easier to make edits here versus after you actually submit. And then that application can be printed so students can keep a copy. And then here's that certification or affidavit and signature. RISE Act eligible students do have to certify that they both meet all 5 eligibility requirements, and they have to certify that they will file an application to become a permanent resident at the earliest opportunity they are eligible to do so. Then they're going to provide that student signature via that PIN number. And then there's also the parent signature and certification piece. So for the certification, they are again certifying that the accuracy of the information on their application. Parents do not need to sign the affidavit, just the student, but they do have to provide a parent signature with their PIN number. And then they're going to sign and submit. So for dependent students, both the student and parent have to sign, and the student cannot even submit the application without a parent signature. For independent students, just the student has to sign and submit. Then for parent access to the application, the parent may sign the application after the student has signed it, either during the same session, or again, it can be saved and signed at a separate time. And it requires both the student's ISAC ID number and the parent's 4-digit PIN that's sent to their email address. Then Section 7, you'll see this confirmation. So that'll have the ISAC ID number at the top, as well as information about what happens next. Students will receive a confirmation email. They will be notified if corrections need to be made, and their information will be sent to the institutions that they listed. Like I said, the student will not receive an SAI at the end of their application like they do with the FAFSA, so they will find out their MAP eligibility through their financial aid offers, or they can go talk to their financial aid office if they choose. And now we are coming up on the end of the presentation, so I do want to give you all some resources just before we wrap up. First and foremost, on the ISAC student portal would of course be the alternative application itself. We also have the alternative application user guide as well as a worksheet. There's an alternative application troubleshooting guide, so to help you troubleshoot problems with the alternative application. And then there's also information about undocumented student liaisons. And then I'm sure you are familiar with this, at least to some degree at this point. We have resources about One-Click College Admit. This is the state administered direct admissions initiative. So here you can find resources to help families navigate this process. You can find FAQs for juniors, FAQs for seniors, a step-by-step guide, an informational webinar recording, as well as downloadable materials that can be used by counselors. We also offer year-round help through our ISAC Core. These are near-peer mentors that support students and families with post-secondary and career exploration, scholarship searches, and completion of financial aid applications. Notice we say financial aid applications, not just FAFSAs, because they are also trained to help with the alternative application. So to find your local ISAC Core member, you can enter your zip code on the ISAC student portal, and it'll bring up the core members in your district, or you can schedule a virtual meeting by using ISAC bookings. And then I also want to highlight the First Generation Scholars Network. To join this for first-gen students, students can just simply click the Join Now button on the ISAC student portal, which will allow them to connect with an FGSN mentor, find an FGSN program on their campus, and join check-in events with other first-gen students. So this is a free service for first-generation college students. And then here is a project that Crystal and I have been working on for professionals who work with first-gen students. You'll find, it's a newsletter, so here you will find a variety of different multimedia resources. So if you are interested in signing up, you can scan that QR code or you can find it on our website. And then we also want to highlight the Illinois College Access Network, Illinois CAN. This is a network of college access practitioners that strives to improve post-secondary access and success for low-income first-generation students. If you are interested, you can join today to become a member of this vibrant professional community that focuses on 4 objectives: increasing visibility of Illinois college access programs and services, disseminating college access research and best practices, providing professional development and technical assistance for college access providers, and facilitating communication and collaboration among college access providers. So that link is also on the slide. And then we are also excited to announce a new professional development opportunity, the PACE curriculum training for 6th through 8th grade. This is a free event happening at Parkland College on Tuesday, April 21st, 2026, from 8:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. and registration is now open. So please register or share this out with those who may be interested. Registration will close on Thursday the 19th or when full capacity is reached. And then we do have professional development offerings from ISAC. They are all free, offered both in person and virtually for school counselors, college and career staff, college access professionals, and more. These trainings include a FAFSA line by line, working with special student populations, monthly webinars, and our financial aid certification series, which typically takes place in January. So you can monitor our website to see any updates about upcoming professional development offerings. And then that brings us to the end of today's presentation. So thank you all. I know we've only got about a minute left for questions, but if you do have any questions that you think of after the fact or you need specific assistance, you can contact the professional development team at isac.outreachtraining@illinois.gov. Or we would also encourage you to sign up for ISAC's e-messaging service to receive the latest news and updates at www.isac.org/e-messaging. Thank you.
Nicole, really quick, we did get a question. Can you go back to the student signature for section 7? We did get a question about the signature portion.
Is it here?
Yeah, so we did get a question, just saying that sometimes that can be a little bit tricky to find. So the way I find that it is a little bit hidden in there. So once a student gets to section 7, I didn't have a chance to type this out, so I'm going to say it verbally. They can go on to that bottom. It's right now highlighted in red. I always look for that little pencil icon because it's generally underneath it. It'll say required student signature, and it'll let them know if it's signed or unsigned. If it is unsigned, they can hit that provide signature. So the letters provide signature. It doesn't look like a button, but it's actually a button. So if they click the words provide signature, what will pop up is a little box where they can type in the PIN number. The PIN number is always, in my experience, 4 digits. If the student lost it, they can resend it. Once student signature is provided, it will say everything has been signed. They can go back. It'll say parent signature unsigned. And the parent signature will be under parent signature and certification. Same process, they'd hit provide signature. Once it says parent signature unsigned, parent would click the provide signature, click on the actual words. They can type in the PIN number, go back and submit. I hope that clarifies that. I know it's a little bit trickier than the FAFSA because the FAFSA just has that checkbox. But with the alternative application, just look for that pencil icon and click on the words provide signature for that PIN number box to pop up.
Okay. Thank you for that, Crystal. Were there any other questions?
I think we got to them all. That was the only one that I wanted to make sure to address.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. As long as you don't have any other questions, you are free to go.